Chapter 7. The Real Moment of Impact. The footage had burrowed into Ava like a cold stone. It replayed in the flicker of every abandoned screen they passed, in the static that hummed under the city's frozen skin, in the hush between her breaths. She had watched it once and thought she understood. She had watched it again and felt the floor fall out from under whatever certainty she had left. Eli stood beside her in the dim control room of the surveillance hub, the folder with his photograph folded and heavy in his hands. The light from the monitor painted him the color of confession. For a long time neither of them spoke. Outside, the city remained a gallery of paused lives. Inside, the room smelled faintly of dust and old coffee and the iron tang of fear. "Show me again," Ava whispered. Eli obliged. The feed, stubborn in its amber slow motion, opened on a street that looked like any other. Trash cans tipped, a child's bicycle abandoned, a storefront window with its open sign frozen mid-blink. Then the soldier, Eli, entered frame in motion, not the sedate, measured man she'd met in the frozen second, but a figure running through a world that still allowed momentum. He sprinted, shoulders pumping, knees high. There was a cadence to him that made her chest clench. In the footage he seemed to move with an urgency that belonged to someone who had already decided he would not let the world end for another. The child, the small, impossibly vulnerable shape, stood in the street, lost in the ordinary business of being a child until Eli dropped into the frame like a falling angel, pushing the small body out of the path of whatever came next. A flash, white and too bright to hold, and then the screen stuttered into an incomprehensible bloom. For a sliver of a second the world in the footage was consumed by a light so pure it erased the edges of faces. The audio that accompanied it in untouched recordings was a single, terrible throb, like a heart trying to expand but bursting instead. Ava pressed her palms to her knees, feeling suddenly as if the room tilted. "He ran toward the blast," she mouthed. He took the child." Eli didn't look away from the image. His jaw worked as though shearing something inside him. "I remember the run," he said, voice rough. "I remember the kid. I remember thinking, if I can move him maybe there's a way out. But you," Ava's throat caught. "The file says." "I died," Eli said without finishing. He didn't need to. The paper in the folder had already said it, clinical and absolute. But what the paper could not capture was the way his body had kept moving when everything else folded. The way whatever exploded had not simply ended lives but had thrown them together in an impossible seam. Ava stared at him, at the man who had been hurt and healed and perhaps unmade. She wanted to reach across the small space and hold him, to anchor him by touch. Instead she found herself swallowing a memory she had tried so long to keep locked away. The boy she could not save, the mother's hands trembling as she gave Ava a trinket of thanks that later felt like an accusation. The knowledge that someone else's last act could be this large, that the final pressure of a human will could arrest time itself, was a kind of sacrilege. "Do you understand?" Eli asked softly. "What we are standing in?" She tried to keep her voice level. "A fragment. Fossilized second. Your consciousness didn't just stop here by accident. This." She gestured at the screens, the clocks, the stillness that wrapped the city like gauze. "This is the last second of your life." He closed his eyes, and in that small motion she saw a sliding door closing between who he had been and who he might be in this place. "I think I already knew," he said. "But knowing and saying it out loud are different things." "How could you pretend?" she demanded, the question sharp and immediate. Why didn't you tell me? Eli opened his eyes and looked at her the way a man looks at a wound and knows there's nothing he can do but watch it. Because I couldn't bear to make you choose, he said simply. Because I wanted to give you, us, something that felt like time instead of a waiting room for grief. The admission hit her like cold rain. For a moment Ava couldn't sort her anger from gratitude. She wanted to chastise him for withholding the truth, selfish in its protection, and then she wanted to thank him for the hours and small mercies he had given her. The hand held in the dark, the stories told under a theater of frozen stars, the way his shoulder had been a place to rest without being judged. You could have told me, she whispered. I couldn't, he repeated. I didn't have the courage. I thought if I kept you here, if I kept this second, maybe you wouldn't have to face the part of you that's been waiting for someone to leave. I thought I could buy you time. Ava felt lines of old guilt and present tenderness cross and knotted inside her. She realized then that she had clung to him not only because he was the only moving thing in that frozen world, but because he was the only person who had been an answer to the loneliness she had carried like a small stone. The thought of losing him, even if his loss had already been written elsewhere, made the air in her lungs thin. But you didn't save him, she said, voice breaking in half. The child, did he live? Eli's face crumpled. The man on the screen had not been able to protect everything. He took the child down the block, Eli said. He shoved the boy out of the street. I remember the weight of him, how small, how fragile, and then the light. The next thing I recall is pain that wasn't there, like someone cupped a bell and rang it inside me. You said you never feel pain anymore, Ava said, surprise cutting through sorrow. I don't, he said. Not like before. I remember the moment of impact like a photograph. I don't remember the aftermath. It's as if my consciousness lasted an extra breath, an afterimage, while my body ceased. Ava wanted to touch him then, to press her forehead to his, to trade breaths. Instead she sat on the edge of an overturned chair, the ache of impending loss a physical thing. The surveillance footage continued its cruel loop, then stuttered, then offered another fragment. A different angle, the white bloom spreading across a storefront, dust and glass suspended as if an enormous hand had slapped a pause on reality. You said earlier this might be a kind of superposition, Ava said. Two realities overlapped. Could the second be sustained by a will? By the intensity of a final act? Eli looked at her as if she had given voice to a thought that had been hiding in both of them. It's possible, he admitted. Maybe the strength of the act, my act, carved a niche in time. A place where a consciousness could hold on for a moment longer. And if it is you who is holding it? Ava asked, a rawness in her voice. If this whole thing is you gripping the second with your last breath so you could make sure one child lived? Eli swallowed. The confession trembled on his lips like ice. Maybe I did, he said. Maybe it's the only thing that makes sense. But it doesn't mean I can keep holding it forever. She leaned forward, fingers threading through the edge of her glove until the fabric creased, until the seam bit her skin. Then let someone else help, she said. We'll figure this out together. We'll find a way to. He shook his head gently. It's not about fixing the world, Eli said, voice small and honest. It's about whether I can be saved. Maybe the physics of it don't allow rescue. Maybe what I am now, this echo of a man, is tethered to the moment I chose. Maybe I didn't just die. Maybe my staying is the hold that keeps this second from collapsing immediately. That knowledge sat between them like a verdict. Ava felt her chest narrow until it was difficult to breathe. If his continued presence was what kept the second intact, if his consciousness was the anchor to that impossible slice of time, then every step she had taken with him, every laugh, and every quiet confession had been allowed because of a sacrifice she could not accept to ask him to continue making. "You knew," she said, soft and fierce. "You knew, and you didn't tell me because you didn't want me to have to decide to leave you." He stared at her, pain and love crossed on his face. "I thought I was sparing you." "You were sparing me from the decision," she corrected. "Not from the grief." Eli's eyes filled. He reached out, tentative as a question, and cupped her cheek with his hand. It was a small, almost unbearably domestic thing, the touch of someone trying to make the world less sharp. "You deserve the truth," he whispered. "I couldn't face telling you. I couldn't lose you by telling you what would happen if this second broke." Ava felt his thumb press against the line where grief lived. She wanted to scream that they would not let this be the story of them. She wanted to gather him into her arms and will the universe to be kinder. She wanted to bargain with physics and with fate and with whatever tethered him to a dying moment. But in the quiet that followed, the monitors around them flickered, the light wavered. Somewhere in the city a clock, one of the many mechanical relics they had found, made a soft, impossible click. A hairline fissure of white light opened in the wall not far from the console. It crawled like a living thing, thin and probing. Eli's voice was a thread. "Ava!" Her name on his lips was both a benediction and an accusation. She felt every choice she had ever made narrow to a point. He met her eyes fully without flinching. "It's time to choose." The words loomed between them, simple and absolute, and the room held its breath in answer. Chapter 8. Choice. The city was unraveling. Not in sudden bursts of catastrophe, not in violent shattering, but in something far more heartbreaking. A slow, soft unmaking, like a memory fading even as you try to cling to it. Across the street, a parked car flickered between solidity and ghost light. A storefront sign lost its color, then its shape, then its reason for ever having been there at all. A sliver of pavement glowed and thinned beneath their feet, the world beneath it yawning away into nothing. The last second was dissolving. Ava's breath trembled in her chest. Eli's hand hovered near hers, not touching yet, but close enough that she could feel the warmth that shouldn't exist in a dying moment. This was the place where choices had to be made. And the cruelty was that she finally understood what she wanted, right as the universe prepared to take it away. They stood at the center of the frozen intersection, surrounded by the fragile ghosts of a world caught mid-breath. A woman forever reaching for a falling bag of groceries. A cyclist lifting an arm to shield his eyes from the blast. A pair of lovers locked in a half-argument, expressions frozen in frustrated devotion. The heartbreak of unfinished lives pressed around them. Ava's voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe I could stay." Eli stiffened. "Ava!" She didn't let him interrupt. Her words spilled like cracks running along glass. "This world is breaking, yes. But it hasn't broken yet. People survive in far worse states. Could stay with you. We could keep this second alive together. We could share whatever time is left." Eli took one step toward her. Only one, and the look in his eyes was more painful than any physical wound she could imagine. "You mean well," he said softly. But you're not thinking clearly. I am, she insisted, though her voice trembled. Eli, look at me. You don't fade when you're with me. This second holds because we're both here. We could stretch it. Fight for it. Ava. His voice cracked. Ava, no. The world flickered again, the street lamps bending in colorlessness, the air around them stuttering, the boundary of existence thinning like fabric pulled too tight. But Eli looked only at her. You have a life, he said. You have a world. Job. A brother who wants you back. People you can still save. People who still have breath left to lose. Tears welled behind Ava's eyes. And what about you? He smiled then. God, that smile. Gentle and unbearably sad. My life already ended, Ava. Her chest collapsed inward. She shook her head violently. No, you're here. You're talking to me. You're breathing. I'm existing, he corrected. Not living. He lifted his hand, cupping her cheek slowly, reverently, as if memorizing the shape of her. You deserve someone who can wake with you in the morning, he whispered. Who can age with you. Who can hold your life in his hands without losing his own. But I choose you, she whispered fiercely. And that, Eli breathed, is exactly why I have to let you go. The world cracked, a thin seam of blinding white slicing through the building beside them. Time was tugging at its frayed edges. The second was collapsing. Ava reached for him then, not gently, not carefully, but with the raw desperation of someone holding onto a door as it's being pulled shut. Don't make me leave you. Eli's eyes closed in pain. You're not leaving me, he whispered. You're letting me rest. A sob tore from her chest. He took her shaking hands in both of his, grounding her the way he'd done since the moment they met. Ava, I know how heavy guilt is for you. I know that when you lose someone you feel responsible, even if fate itself wrote the ending. But this isn't your fault. None of it is. But if I stay. If you stay, he said gently, you die with me. The finality of the words hit harder than the blast that had created this impossible second. Ava felt the entire world tilt, as if she were falling toward a choice she had no map for. She leaned into him, forehead against his chest, arms around him the way she had wanted to hold him since the world froze. Eli, I'm scared. I know, he murmured, pressing his cheek to the top of her head. I am too. They held each other in the center of a dissolving street. Two living hearts in a world long dead. For a long time neither spoke. The city continued to dim at its edges. A traffic light blinked once and then vanished. A billboard dissolved into particles of white. A crack in the air shivered past them, pulling a sliver of the street into absence. Ava closed her eyes, her voice a thin ribbon of sound. If I go, what happens to you? Eli's breath softened. I let go. I stop holding this second open. And then time continues. The real time. No. I finally finish dying. Ava's hands tightened in his shirt until her knuckles whitened. That sounds like abandonment, she whispered. I don't want to abandon you. Then don't. Eli lifted her chin. Remember me. That's all I ask. Ava's tears spilled, quiet and unstoppable. I don't want a memory, she said. I want you. I know, he whispered. God, Ava, I know. His thumb brushed her cheek, wiping tears that immediately returned. "But I can't ask you to bury yourself in a single second just to keep me company." Ava's voice fractured. "But I love you." Eli inhaled sharply, as though her words gave him shape even as the world unmade itself around them. He held her face between his hands, eyes burning. "I love you too," he said. "More than I have any right to. More than I can admit without destroying us both." The words shattered something in her, something that made her sink against him, that made her suddenly want to collapse into the space between his hands and stay there until the end of everything. But the world answered before she could. A violent crack tore across the sky, a soundless fracture, white and blinding. Ava stumbled. Eli held her upright. "Ava, listen to me." She looked up at him through tears. "It's time," he whispered. Her lips trembled. "To choose." He nodded. "Ava, you have to let time move again." The crack split the street in two. Light bled outward. The second was seconds from collapsing entirely. Ava pressed her forehead to his, the last fragments of this stolen heartbeat trembling around them. "Eli," she whispered, "I don't know how to say goodbye." He kissed her forehead, soft, slow, devastating. "You don't have to," he murmured. "Just choose to live." Another crack. Another burst of dissolving pavement. Ava's breath hitched. Her hands tightened around his. And then, with a final trembling exhale, she whispered the choice he had begged her to make. "I will let time move again." Eli's eyes closed. A single tear slipped down his cheek. "Thank you," he breathed, "for giving me a last second worth holding." The world burst into white, and the second broke.